Okay, so we're back with Laura Brand, our criminologist, and we have a special guest today. We have Detective Louis Aguilera, and he has been working the William Suff case and has been able to identify a Jane Doe from 1986, one of William Suff's victims, Kathy Small, who was 19 when she was found dead. And so we're really thankful to have Detective Aguilera on to kind of tell us about the case. And it's really weird because when we first started working with Laura, I think William Suff was one of the second people that we recorded an interview with, second or third of the serial killers that we were recording with Laura on
2022.
Camera in 2022. And this whole thing came up right then because she had just talked to some detectives at LASD, and I'll let Laura kind of fill in the details. But before we jump into that, Louis, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how long you've been a homicide detective in Los Angeles for the Sheriff's Department, and kind of give us a thumbnail sketch of, some of the cases you've covered in the past, and then we'll dive right into the William Suff case.
Yeah, thank you for having me, first of all. I've been with the department for the last 36 years. The last 30 years, I've been a detective. I joined the department in 1988, and the day I turned 21, I was sworn in. I became a gang detective after I worked patrol in South Central LA. Also a gang detective infiltrated the Mexican Mafia back in 1995. I worked that till 2007 when I became a homicide detective, until currently where I'm still assigned to the Homicide Bureau. Sheriff's Homicide Bureau is unlike any other homicide bureau throughout the state. Not only do we handle homicides for the Sheriff's Department, which is the largest Sheriff's Department in the country, we also handle homicides and officer-involved shootings for about 35, 36 other agencies. So we go to other police departments, jurisdictions, and handle their homicides as well. Since I've been at homicide, I've probably handled about 400, a little over 400 murders, including the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash. I was involved in that investigation.
Wow.
The recovery of the bodies, the Monterey Park mass shooting a couple of years ago where numerous people were killed. The Saugus High School mass shooting.
Our daughter was there.
Yeah,
we were there that
as
day.
well. The Pique Andresian case, which was the young 5-year-old boy that we were searching for about 2 months, found his remains in Santa Barbara County and ended up charging the father for his homicide. And then shortly after that, as soon as we finished that, we got the Trinity Jones case, and that was a 9-year-old girl that was found in a suitcase in Hacienda Heights, and it turned out to be her mother and not the biological father, but mother's boyfriend. So I've handled numerous high-profile cases, and just coincidentally just stumbled upon this one.
So tell us a little bit of how you stumbled onto it, and how because it's been a long time.
Yeah, it really has. So back in October of 2019, I was doing my usual thing at 6 a.m, working out every morning at one of the local sheriff stations, and I got a text message from Brenda Schaefer, who's a coroner investigator still working for the LA County Coroner's Office. She sent me a text saying that she was on a natural death call in South Pasadena, and she was kind of freaked out by what was in the house and what she saw. And I know Brenda, I've worked several cases with her. For her to tell me she's freaked out about something, I said, tell me. I went to a phone, I called her. She said, can I show you some pictures here at this house? It's a 63-year-old male, probably had a heart attack. They found some narcotics paraphernalia next to him. He was found on the couch in his living room. And there's just some really, really weird things there. So she sends me pictures, and there's photos of blow-up dolls laying next to him, full makeup, lipstick, dressed to the nines, women's underwear everywhere, all over the ground, even though he lived by himself for the last 10 years, never been married, no girlfriend, no kids. There were handcuffs coming out from the mattress, chained to the bottom, to the floor underneath the mattress. Polaroid pictures of women. Some of these women were hogtied. They had socks in their mouths taped around, and they looked like they were being tortured at the time. So I said, wow, I called her right back when she sent me the pictures. I said, yeah, I'm gonna get dressed. I'm gonna take my partner. We're gonna go down there so I can take a look. So once we went to the house, it was South Pasadena is notorious for having a lot of trust fund babies, people that inherit the homes out there. So this was the house. It looked like a tweaker house surrounded by multi-million-dollar homes. It was up on a large cul-de-sac up a hill, somewhat near South Pasadena High School. Anyway, so we get to the house and we start searching. We start looking, not necessarily searching, but just looking at the items she pointed out. And there were knives everywhere, just Polaroid pictures. He had collages. On these collages, he had women's photos on there, some Polaroid pictures, some cutouts of magazines. And then on the collages, he wrote how he tortured some of these women, raped some of these women, hid in their closets, and named a few by name. So she also pointed out to a newspaper clipping, and the newspaper clipping just had the article, just the headline that said, woman identified in South Pasadena murder. And it gave the name of Kathy Small. So I called our desk and I asked our desk, can you research this in our database, Sheriff's Homicides database, and see if this is our case and if it was solved. I'm thinking if it's not solved, this is our killer. This is the guy. This is a souvenir. This guy's a freak. He killed this woman. So they called me back, said, no, it's an unsolved body dump, what we call body dump, when she was left out the street. And she was stabbed and strangled. And the investigators are long retired, and the case occurred in 1986. So we started doing research on our decedent at that house, and it turns out he was a lifelong resident at that house. At the time of the murder in 1986, he was in his mid-20s. I think he was 27 years old. At this time, he was 63, I believe. So I'm thinking the whole time, let's get a workup on this guy. Let's see what kind of record he has. Let's run his raps. Let's run everything we can and find out everything we can on this guy. So we do, and we find out he had never been arrested, never received a citation. There's nothing, clean record. So then our next thing, or my next thing, is I wanted to do is let's start researching who these women are that he named on these collages. The women that he said he raped and assaulted, hid in their closets. And we were actually able to find a couple of them. And this is now, we're going into days work after we go to the house. These women said, yeah, I don't know the name. It kind of sounds familiar. I may have gone to high school with the guy, but I don't really know who he is. And it turns out they did go to high school with him. He just had some weird infatuation with these women. So we wanted to, obviously, we're thinking right away, this is our killer. We knew by the time we were at that house when we researched it, the body dump was directly across the street from this house. So obviously to us, we're thinking, this is our guy. Let's get his DNA. Let's go to the autopsy, and we'll pull his blood swabs and his blood swatches, and we'll compare it to whatever DNA we have. So I go to our crime lab and I research the case, whatever evidence we have, and I learned that the sexual assault kit and her clothing had never been tested for DNA. So I took all of that to the crime lab. I started working hand in hand with one of our criminalists. I gave her the decedent's blood swatch from the coroner's office, and we started doing the comparison. And she called me back within a couple of weeks and said, hey, your decedent does not come back to anything that I'm finding on the sexual assault kit and the evidence that we recovered, which was her clothing, her being Kathy Small. So she said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull as much evidence as I can. There was also a hair strand found on Kathy's inner elbow in the fold of her arm. And the criminalist determined the only way that hair could have got there is from the person that put her there on the street. There was no way she could have got that hair and been transported to and from, dropped, and then the piece of hair would have fallen off her arm. So once it went into the CODIS database, which is the national database for DNA, we came back within a couple of months a hit on Bill Suff. I had looked in the file previously, and I saw that during the investigation, sometime in the early 2000s, Riverside County sent a couple of DA investigators to San Quentin to interview Bill Suff. I listened to the interview, and once I heard the interview, it lasted 15 minutes. And the interview was, hey, do you know who Kathy Small is? No. Hey, have you been to LA? No, never been to LA. Okay, thanks. See ya. Peace out. So I felt when I was listening to it, I was thinking, God, this guy's cocky. He's home. He's essentially home. He's been there 30 years, right? And my game plan is now we know this is our suspect. Let's pull him out of his comfort zone and let's bring him to LA. Let's bring him to LA County where he's not comfortable, where he can't stop an interview mid-process and say, I'm going to go back to my room. I'm done. And where he's not comfortable. At San Quentin, he has a lot of things that he's not going to get at the county jail. So it took us a while because obviously, as you know, during this time period was COVID. And during COVID, I don't know about any other state, but California protected these inmates like children. They did not want them moving. They didn't want anything. If they did move from one facility to another, they wanted these inmates to stay, these prisoners to stay at wherever you took them to. So they wanted, if we got the court order to remove them from custody of San Quentin, they wanted us to keep them for a long, long time. That wasn't going to happen. So I wrote the court order for 30 days. And after we went through a lot of paperwork, management to management, county management to state management, we were able to bring them down to San Quentin.
Yeah. Is that how, I mean, you just talked about because it was COVID, but normally if there was not COVID, is that common? Do you usually extract inmates, offenders from their prisons to bring them into a isolated location for that purposes, that tactical purposes of taking them out of their environment, to throwing them off balance, so you have the upper hand? Yeah. I mean, is that a common tactic that you guys use, and how hard is that to make happen?
It is pretty common, but it's not common with death row inmates.
Right. That was my next question. Yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty common. I know a lot of people in here in our office that have done it. I've done it. We have to bring, there's times we've made someone that's already in custody on another case in prison. We've made them on something else. We have to bring them down. Maybe we have to do a live lineup. Somehow we can get them down here to do a DNA swab, even though we can obviously go to whichever prison to do it. But there's various reasons that you have to articulate in a court order to bring them down. And if you have a good judge that's pretty smart on, what we need to do as far as our investigations go, then it's pretty easy. But I don't know of anyone that I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot of people here, that have brought someone down from death row.
And Laura, you had said that too. You had said you'd never seen anyone in 10 years that you've been working up there.
No, I've never
off
seen
of death row like that before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, and that was the game plan. Like I said, once I heard that interview with the DA investigators from Riverside County, I knew I wanted them here in LA.
Yeah. Laura, were you aware that he had been questioned prior to when Louis extracted him out of there and brought him down to LA?
No, what happened was right before we recorded with him, I sometimes will do a surprise visit to San Quentin, and I had done a surprise visit in September. And I guess he had just gotten back from interviewing with you, and he actually thought it was a setup. Like I was sent to come and do a checkup or a check back, and he found out I just moved to Los Angeles. And I was living in Torrance, where he's from. So he thought this was like a setup, like I was coming back to extract more information. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he was like, then he started telling me about Kathy and her homicide.
And that was after our interview?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, because when we did bring him down and I was talking to him, I learned that he had nobody that visited him at all. And his family disowned him. He hates his family. He hates every single one of them, especially his brothers or his brother. But once he started talking, then I knew he was a lonely guy and wanted to talk, and I knew we had him.
That's fantastic. And then when did you realize you can connect? Obviously, his DNA evidence matched what they found on Kathy.
Yeah, it was months after we did the. It was probably 2020. It was August of 2020 when we learned that his DNA matched, and then, like I said, getting the court order and doing the process of retrieve or bringing him back from San Quentin took quite a while.
And how long did you interview him for? Was it just a one-time thing that you brought him down, or did you pull him out? And how long did you spend with him? Kind of give us the lowdown.
Yeah. So what we did is I sent two of my one former partner and one current partner at the time. We sent them in the sheriff's department's airplane to pick him up at San Quentin. And once they arrived in San Quentin, he was all set. We had been communicating with San Quentin prison for quite a while. They drove him back to the airport, put him on sheriff's airplane once again, flew him to Long Beach Airport. Once they got to Long Beach Airport, I wanted nothing to do with this. I didn't want him to meet me until the moment I walked in that interview room. Once they got to Long Beach Airport, we had a helicopter waiting. So our investigators got on a sheriff's helicopter, flew to East LA, which is about 5 miles from the county jail, in a grassy field. We had our SWAT team there and another investigator. I'm actually watching this from a distance, the helicopter land, him being pulled out, because I just wanted to get a visual of him, because I'd never seen him obviously in person before. And then I see him walking with a walker. I'm thinking, oh my God, this. And I knew he wasn't a healthy man. We had his medical records sent to the sheriff's department, and our brass at the time, which was a different regime under a different sheriff, were not happy that we were bringing this 70-plus-year-old man who's unhealthy to our facility. Now we've got to take care of him. What happens if he dies in our custody? So I had to deal with that red tape. But once we did all that, it was fine. So our SWAT team drives him to the county jail. And I still, at the time he arrived, I didn't want him to see me. We waited about 2 hours or so for them to process him. We had an interview room that we had rigged or made to be an interview room. It was actually a former cell that our people have been working on, our engineers and our electricians, for a couple of months, and put cameras throughout the interview room. And the first day, I think it was about 4 or 5 hours. And then a few days later to a week later, I interviewed him for a few more hours. I think in total was about 8 hours. But once I started talking to him, I just felt I want to make him comfortable. I told him we were there and we were investigating a homicide that occurred in LA. And his face just dropped as soon as I said that. But I wanted, once again, to make him comfortable. So I went over his life. We went over his life story from the beginning. And I had photos that I had retrieved from the internet that I printed out that I wanted to show him of his family. The thing that I learned, at least what he was telling us, he loved his dad. His dad, what he told us, was everything to him. His dad bought him his instruments. He was in band. When his dad left the family, according to him, he was shocked that his dad didn't take him. And he said, I don't care about my other siblings. I could care less about them. I just wanted him to take me. And then he started to have issues with his mother. And then now I'm thinking, okay, this guy has some issues with mom. He hates women. And then he starts talking about the issues with a girlfriend or a former girlfriend, and then a sister, ex-girlfriend, ex-wife. And I'm just thinking, oh, yeah, this guy hates women. I think during the interview at one point I asked him, why didn't you ever kill any men? Yeah, I just wanted to get a rise out of him to see what he would say. And he really didn't comment on it much at all. His thing, he had no beef with men. It was women. And so we went over for hours talking about his life, joining the military. He really distanced himself from any of the hellacious murders, the light bulb in one of the victims. He definitely distanced himself from things like that. He admitted to about half of the murders. We didn't get into real detail about the Riverside County murders because, to be honest with you, I didn't know enough about the murders, so I didn't really want to talk about them. I was more concerned and focused with Kathy's murder, and I knew everything about her murder. I knew about the witness statements, who she was living with at the time, what kind of car she was picked up in the night before the murder. So I knew a lot that I can get into detail with that. But I wanted him to be comfortable. And once I learned in all those years he'd been in prison that his family stopped talking to him after a certain time, I think the only visitors he had mentioned that he had were a boyfriend or a husband-wife couple in the past that were like pen pals or something. People that are
Yeah.
For some reason enamored with serial killers and you want to be around them. I think that was about it. So I knew he was going to talk, and he did.
Yeah. What did he tell you? Did he once you kind of laid it out for him and basically started piecing together this puzzle and basically putting him there? Because he initially said he never did any murders in the Los Angeles area. Did he confuse the fact that he didn't think Pasadena was Los Angeles?
He just said Los Angeles in general. So what I did was I started talking about Kathy. I showed him photos of Kathy, and then I started showing him crime scene photos. And once I showed him one of the close-up crime scene photos of Kathy on the ground, he said, I remember her. That's how I left her on the street. And then he started getting into specifics. I kind of went, well, let's start from the beginning. How did you meet? Where did you pick her up? How did she end up there? So he said earlier that day, the day prior, he was in this computer equipment or computer repair shop that he was working at the time. And he named the husband-wife couple that owned it. And I believe it was in Lake Elsinore. And he said she walked into the shop. And she was walking around. They exchanged numbers. So I knew later on that night, she received a phone call at the house she was staying at. And I know this because in the paperwork, in the case file, the investigators interviewed who Kathy was living with at the time. He's long been deceased, but he was an older gentleman at the time. He says that the phone rings, the house phone, and it was a male asking for Kathy. So he goes to get Kathy in the bedroom. He's in the kitchen, leaves the phone in the kitchen off the hook, goes and tells Kathy. Now he's on the phone listening while she's talking to this guy. And he hears the guy identify himself as Bill, ask her to go with him to Pasadena, LA area. And he said, I'll give you $50. So he hangs up the phone. Kathy, about 10, 15 minutes later, he says he hears a honk. And he sees a 4-door red sedan. And Kathy walking out, and she says, hey, I'm going with this guy. I'll be back. And Kathy, he describes exactly what she's wearing and what she was found in the next day. So he's the only one that sees that red car, that red 4-door sedan. There was another neighbor next door who described a completely different car. So now you've got two cars on a possibility of what she was last seen in. And I believe at the time the red car didn't come into play with any of the Riverside County murders during that time period. I believe it did later. They knew the existence of a red car. So anyways, he says he takes her. He tells us he was going to the South Pasadena, or to Pasadena, he describes it. And he was going to pick up his boss, who he had dropped off earlier in the day, to go do a repair job. He didn't know exactly where it was, but he knew it was somewhere near where he left her body. So prior to arriving to Pasadena, they go back to the computer repair shop and have sex. After having sex, they drive to South Pasadena. Once they get to South Pasadena, he ends up on that street. According to him, he doesn't remember how he got there. I'm still thinking there has to be a connection with the natural death call from 2019. Mm-hmm. Why he chose that street, I have no idea, because if you've ever been on that street, you can't find that street if you were to get lost in South Pasadena. It's so secluded, and that cul-de-sac is about a quarter mile, so you have to go all the way up the hill to even know that it's a cul-de-sac.
So wait, I'm confused. So the guy in 2019, the guy that was dead in the house, yes. How far was he from where Kathy was found?
Across the street.
Whoa, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that's what kind of drew him, the whole thing.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
And so I'm still thinking as I'm interviewing him, Bill Suff has a connection to that guy.
Yeah.
It was Bank Street, to that guy on Bank Street, because that guy's a freak, and there is no way that guy's not connected to Bill Suff. That's what I'm thinking. And I tried to get that out of him, and he said he didn't know anybody there. He just said he randomly found that street. So they get to the street, and they start arguing. He said about money. He hadn't paid her. I don't know if it was the money for sex or if it was the $50 that he owed her for the accompanying him to the location. So they're arguing on the street. One thing leads to another, and he says that she pushes him or slaps him in the face and knocks his glasses off. And he said he lost it. He was enraged. He reached between the two seats, in the front seat, and grabbed a knife, which he normally kept in between the two seats. And then he described it. He showed us that he was like backhanding her with the knife, stabbing her in the chest. He said he just lost it. He didn't remember strangling her, although the autopsy results show that she was strangled as well. She had the petechial hemorrhaging, which is indicative of being strangled. So after he kills her, he says he just pushed her out of the car. And that's where the hair strand was laying on her arm. And then he says he drives off, goes to a hamburger stand around the corner. He doesn't remember what the name of the place was, but he washes his hands. He goes and picks up his boss, and he drives back home. He says that the car was a rental that his boss had. I don't know if I believe that, because I was speaking recently to Bob Creed, who was the lead investigator for Riverside County at the time. And Bob said they did have some information that he was driving around in a red car at the time. And he, in fact, when he was arrested, there was a knife between one of the cars that they had towed and recovered, another knife found between the seats. He told me that once he dropped his boss off, he chucked the knife out, just threw it out of the window into some unknown area in Lake Elsinore. According to him, he had never been to LA after that. According to him, he didn't know anybody in South Pasadena. He didn't know that person. I showed him a picture of our natural death victim. He didn't know him. Our natural decedent had some associates, if you will, that were shady characters as well, that we did an extensive research for months into these guys. And I'm still convinced to this day that those guys are responsible for something. I just can't quite pinpoint what it is.
Yeah, I mean, just having the news article up there in there, and that just.
Well, I wonder if any of them were involved in that nightclub that Donnie and Bill were running down.
Well, Donnie was running.
Well, Donnie was running. Bill's brother Donnie was running the nightclub down in Riverside County.
Right.
And according to Leah, there was a lot of people that were investors in that company, in that dance club or whatever it was, and a lot of the girls worked there, and then they would just disappear.
Right.
And she even mentioned that her sister knew Kathy.
Okay.
So she knew Kathy. So Kathy had been down to that club at one point.
Right.
So, I mean, who knows? Maybe there's a connection with that. But his brother, I know from what Leah has told us that they were together all the time, him and Donnie.
Okay. Yeah, there's definitely, in fact, talking to Bob Creed and learning about some of the Riverside killers, I know he knew several of them. In fact, he tried to claim at some point during the interview that his brother was responsible for it. And, we're brothers, so we could have similar to if not the same DNA. And then, I just shook my head and said, listen to how ridiculous you sound. And then he went off that and then started going back into, telling us the truth about what happened. But he definitely dislikes his brother. Just all of them in general.
Has he told you that too, Laura?
Yeah.
About Donnie?
And Donnie just got arrested with sexual molestation of the sister-in-law, who was a little girl at the time.
There were a few girls. Yeah. He was charged on.
What did he ever say about his dad? I can't remember what you told us.
Does that match up, Laura?
About his dad.
He talked to me a lot about the instruments too. That he was in a band in high school. And then he talked about how much he did love his dad, being in Boy Scouts with his dad. That's all I can remember about his father, really. And then he would talk about him leaving the family, and same thing. He didn't know why he was taken, why he was left with his mother. He had a lot of resentment for his mother. The hatred started there. because it's very indicative of serial killers, the issues with one or both parents, an abandonment parent, a neglectful parent, abusive parent. It's very interesting about the Bank Street with that guy on there. And especially if Bill was committing these crimes with his brother, anger excitation killers, they love to kill in groups. Because they get a thrill out of watching each other. It ups the ante for them. Look at Whitaker and Norris, Lake and Ing. There's countless pairs that do this. So I think there could be a definite connection with that guy on the street.
Yeah. So Louis, at this point, since, obviously Suff's not saying that he had any sort of affiliation with that person who you found in that house that either died, and was it a suicide, or I can't remember what you said. Was it?
It was a natural death.
Natural death.
Yeah, just a natural death.
So,
Cardiac issue.
I mean, what are some of the other things that you feel like that there's some sort of connection, or is it just a gut instinct?
It's a gut instinct, but there's he has an associate that I still kind of taking a look at. We actually at some point surreptitiously got his DNA, and his DNA once again didn't match the unknown person, the DNA that was found on Kathy. According to our criminalist, which isn't unusual for someone of that nature to be having multiple semen donors. So that's really not a huge issue, but this is the person that we're looking at as somewhat concerning to me. So what we did is shortly after we learned of the natural death, and once we did it, we actually did a search warrant in that house a few days later, and recovered just a ton of evidence, just evidence of just weirdness, if you will. Not necessarily, not sure that's a legal term, but we recovered a lot of videotapes, knives, women's underwear to check for DNA, the photos, of course, the collages, photographed the heck out of that house. So we put a teletype out to all the agencies throughout the state. Any unsolved female homicides, any body dumps, anything matching the MO of our murder, please reach out to us. We didn't hear a word from anybody. But we're still not going to give up hope. I've heard and I know this guy's good for a ton of other murders. So we're still going to keep the door open to.
You're talking about Suff. You're talking about Suff, right?
Suff, yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, when
Laura said the same thing. I
she
mean,
said we've been talking with his in-laws for a while now, and some of the stuff that I don't know if you've spoken to them, but I think it would be worth for you guys talking to them because they have a treasure trove of information, and they talk about the house that they were all living in. And Leah at the time, I think was she like 10?
she was like 10 or 11.
10 or 11, and she was obviously, Donnie was doing stuff to her, but she explicitly remembers there was a detached garage behind the house that could fit. He had a what was he talking about, a van?
Like a camper thing.
A camper or a van, and no one was allowed to go in that thing. Dogs used to freak out all around it. And we don't have the actual address. I think she does.
No, she does. We can get. I mean, we had it before, but also that nightclub. A lot of the girls that they would bring home to the house where Leah and her sister were. Sometimes they would just vanish, and Leah would be like, "Well, what happened to so and so? And what happened to so and so?" And she remembers a lot of these girls and who they were because she was hanging out there all the time.
Right.
And I just think that whole club was a breeding ground for these two guys.
And then Laura, was it the cousin? Was it their cousin or another brother? How many brothers were there? Was it just two?
There were two brothers. Yeah.
And who was the other guy? Was he a cousin?
The guy that she was telling us about that lived not too far, that had that was probably dealing drugs and also doing other stuff, that lived in that kind of abandoned road. Remember she was telling us about that?
Yeah, I think that was a cousin. Yeah.
So it just seems like there was more than just Suff doing this stuff.
I thought she said it was another brother.
And we'll have to
confirm that.
A family member.
She thought it was a brother, but it ended up being a cousin. Okay. I think. Yeah.
Which is kind of ironic what you're saying about this young cousin that knew him and mentioned him. Shortly after the press conference we had when we announced, finding out providing some answers, finding out who our killer was for this case. Kimberly Little's daughter reached out to me. Kimberly Little was technically the first victim that he was found guilty of and convicted of. I think she was murdered in 1989. Her daughter reached out to me, and she wanted to know if he admitted to killing her mom, because she wanted that bit of closure in her head. And I told her, I to be honest with her, and I told her I'd get back to her. I just didn't remember if he admitted to killing her, but he did admit to knowing several of these women. And she said, yeah, he knew my mom. He was friends with my mom. In fact, whenever my mom would bring him over, I stayed in my room because I thought he was just weird. I wanted nothing to do with him. She was 10 or 11 at the time. So I definitely want to get back to her and, give her some answers once I watch the video interview again or listen to it. But I thought that was ironic because I know there's another young female saying the same thing, that he was a weird guy and freaked her out.
Oh yeah, totally freaked out Leah. She was scared to death of him.
Yeah, Laura, how many of you do you think they're out there?
It's really hard to say because they just found one in Pasadena, so that's away from Lake Elsinore. So now you have a whole other potential area. Los Angeles County is a hunting ground, so it's hard to say. If there could be more in Los Angeles as well.
I just find it hard to believe that he paroled in 1984 to LA after murdering his daughter, that he went from 84 to 86, a 2-year time period with no murders, and then he went from 86 to 89 is when his first conviction was, with a 3-year period of no murders. There's no way. No way.
We said the same thing. It didn't make sense to us. Like, how could he go those? Suddenly, all of a sudden, he just stopped for 2 years and didn't do anything.
Yeah.
It just didn't seem. It just didn't fit. Someone who's going to murder their own child.
Yeah.
They're not really stopping that.
Yeah. I just wish that agencies and departments throughout will just take a look at their old cases that they have. They may think nothing of it, but like this case in general, this case was sitting on the shelves for a few years. The only reason why it was looked at, it was because Kathy's sister stayed on top of it and called one of our cold case investigators, who since passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately. But he kept her updated on everything. But every new investigator that looked at the case saw that DNA, or saw that the evidence was held, and there was one thing inputted in the database saying that there was DNA tested, or the evidence was tested. So every investigator that looked in the case just assumed that the DNA was tested, that the evidence was tested, and it hadn't been. So that's why it sat on the shelves for years and never been tested before. It was never physically taken to the crime lab for the DNA to get extracted.
So do you think that if you didn't get that call from that coroner that was freaked out and you went and looked at that house, do you think you think that was kind of the trigger to kind of help you solve this?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That's the only reason why I took a look at it, was because of that. And then once I was shocked once I found out that the sexual assault kit, of all things, was not tested.
Wow.
And Laura, he was talking to you about other victims several times when we talked to him, but he wouldn't give you the details. Like, he would allude.
No, they always throw out those little carrots and make you kind of chase it. But I was going to say, I think you should look into Big Bear, because we learned his family actually has a cabin in that area, and that could be a potential place he's taken victims.
Yeah, makes sense. Mm-hmm. Especially if the family has property out there.
Yeah. Very secluded.
And he's still up in San Quentin in the medical area, correct?
No, he's moved.
Oh, where'd they move him to?
He's at a medical facility in Central California.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I definitely like to take another shot at him. I wouldn't mind doing another interview with him, and I'm sure he'll be happy. Obviously, we treated him well, but I don't think he liked. He told stories about hanging out with the other serial killers and how he made food and cheese sandwiches for other inmates, and he was friends at some point with Richard Ramirez, and it's interesting to me just listening to these stories. But once again, like I said, he had nobody to talk to, so he was just loose and talking about everyday life. But there were some fond memories that he smiled at when he was talking about, like, an ex-girlfriend. I don't know if he had mentioned to you at all. He talked about some Native American girlfriend that he had that actually came to visit him when he was stationed in, I believe it was Texas. And his mother calls him and says, hey, I don't remember her name, so-and-so came to see you. And she's talking about maybe you guys getting back together. It was a high school girlfriend. And he was excited. He said it. He said, I was excited because I would have wanted to get back together with her. Mom calls him the next day and says, hey, remember I told you that she came to visit you? Yeah. Well, when she left, she was on her bike. She got hit by a drunk driver and killed. So I'm thinking, oh my God, this guy's telling me the story about how much he hates his mother. Life for him isn't going too well. He hates his family, hates his siblings. And now he mentioned that was the love of his life. Is killed going to see him in the hopes of getting back together with him. So now I'm thinking, oh my God, now I'm kind of understanding him. I'll never agree with it, or I get it that he's, just lost his mind. They have this hatred for women. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. What did you think? I mean, because my first impression, because we were actually shooting the video call that she was having with him, and he just kind of looked like a dumpy janitor from a high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's not the person I saw on the internet from, when he was actually in trial.
Yeah.
He's a frail old hunchback man with a walker. I don't know how tall he is, but I'm probably almost a foot taller than him. Standing next to him, because we actually had him stand up and go look at a podium that we set up, or a poster board that we set up with pictures of his victims and some crime scene photos of previous victims. And he was mentioning, I remember that one. He found it ironic that a lot of these women were killed and had his DNA. To him, that's ironic. So he tried to go down that path at times. But, when you're interviewing somebody like this, especially someone that you want answers from, you don't want to be necessarily you don't want it to be a interview where you're just talking down to him and want it to be adversarial. So, I let him talk. I let him vent. But there were times when he was just going too far. You got to reel him in. But I did mention to him when we started the interview, just look, you're in custody for 12 murders. We're not going to charge you for a 13th murder. It's a waste of time and money. So this is just an open conversation. I just want answers for the family. I don't like to use the word closure in any of my cases.
No.
I don't believe in that. I know families. I still talk to families to this day for murders from years ago. They don't have closure because they'll never
get closure.
They don't. They really don't. So I hate that word. But I just told them I want answers for the family. She has a sister. She has 2 sons, Kathy, and I want to hopefully provide answers to them. So it took a while, but he finally loosened up and talked.
Yeah. What was the family's reaction when you were able to give them those answers?
Kathy's sister was very, very thankful. I actually flew up out of state to go talk to her and tell her in person. I had been giving her updates once I took over the case. I know she was talking to one of our cold case investigators. So I wanted to tell her, hey, I've got the case now, and I want to do whatever I can to provide you some answers. So I kept her updated, and then finally was able to fly out there and give her the answers. She was very thankful. Of course, she wished that her mother was alive, Kathy's mother and her mother, to get the answers for what happened to Kathy, and not necessarily how it happened, but just what happened to her.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very grateful. Still to this day, she's very kind.
Yeah. Well, also the fact that the person who did it is behind bars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She suspected it. She said, I kind of had an idea it was him, but she never thought it was going to get solved. So she was very grateful.
Yeah.
Did she know him?
She did not. No, she lived out here in LA County and Downey at the time. That's where Kathy originally grew up. So she did not.
Yeah.
Ugh. It's just amazing how these little fortuitous things happen. Had you not gotten that text, none of that would have, happened. We've seen that a lot.
That's crazy.
We've seen those things happen a lot. It's always like you have to wonder, like who's helping you out, because it's weird stuff like that. Same like we did the Gary Ridgway case in Seattle, terrible. But same thing, like families hanging on for a long time waiting for answers. And they finally just, one of the other Jane Does finally just got DNA like a few months ago, and they were able to identify her, which was amazing. So it's really great work that you do, Louis and Laura.
I appreciate that.
These families, they really need to know answers. I can't imagine like what it feels like, but I've been around enough victims' families to know how painful it is for them to not have an answer.
Yeah, it's horrible. And like I said, I stay in contact with a lot of my families from old homicides, because we're the person that provided them answers for their loved one that was murdered, and we're that connection between them and their loved one that was murdered. So you do build a relationship with these families. My phone goes off all the time, and it could be any message from a current homicide victim whose case we haven't solved, from their family members. And I like it when family members reach out to me wanting to know want some answers. And I'm okay with that. There's some investigators that might not be okay with it, but I'm okay with that. It shows me that you care about the investigation. Obviously you care about your family member, but you stay on me. And I tell them, just stay on me. But a lot of our homicides are solved by family members.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So you can't let it go.
Yeah. People don't want to talk to me when I show up at your door in a suit, or in your neighborhood in a suit, but they'll talk to the family when they'll go out.
Absolutely. We tell it all the time. We have a couple cold cases we're following right now, and we always say, listen, if you're afraid to go to law enforcement, you can send it to us. We'll get it to them.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people are just afraid to talk to law enforcement because the stakes are so high and they don't want to involve themselves. But
that's the way it works. Yeah.
It's
unfortunately.
But it's pretty amazing. I mean, to me, it's just the way because they don't, they didn't publish that part of the story. They just kind of told you about what you did and how you kind of confirmed it and confirmed the Jane Doe but this is fascinating. Fascinating how, this case didn't go away. It just lay dormant, and then it just needed something to kind of trigger it. And I don't know, to me, that's kind of like a divine intervention when you think about that, when you got that text and started looking into it, and then that article about her being identified in that courtyard. And I mean, and then the fact that these suspicious household, which, deviant behavior, not necessarily, more than likely some criminal activity there, but, you can't, it's not against the law to be deviant.
Yeah. If you tell people about this case, it doesn't make sense. Like here in a press conference, you don't get to know the backstory about what happened. It's a movie. It really is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Which is,
I've never had this happen to me in all these homicide cases I've handled.
No.
And it's just, I like to call it dumb luck, but we'll go with divine intervention.
I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, we've seen it. We've seen it happen several times. I mean, it's these little things that some people, luckily it was you and not someone else, because someone else might not have seen the connection or the value in it. That's the thing. You were the right person to do that. Just like with Laura, like because she goes in and she gets the discovery and she reinvestigates cases that have been dormant for so long, looking for these little nuggets of information that she can investigate to see if there's a connection, if there's still a victim that she can find.
Yeah. Right.
And she's been able to get information about several of them and find the bodies and help get those victims' families some kind of answer.
Well, that's great. You don't realize how important that is to families.
Yeah, I don't think people really do. I think that's the problem. People just want to kind of just forget these people. But, when it's your family member, like we were up in the San Gabriels because, Bittaker, before he passed, gave some pretty detailed information for two of his victims that were up there. And we actually went up there with a retired homicide detective who's working with this philanthropist on this new technology for DNA from soil. Okay. And so they're beta testing it. So we brought him up there and just seeing the area and hearing all the stories that Laura has been able to extract from Bittaker before he passed. I mean, and right now, since they've disbanded death row up there and they've spread them all over in general population across the state, it really, you have all that information from these killers that, that she's still trying to get before they either pass or something happens to them in general population. So I wanted to ask you what you thought about that, the fact that they disbanded death row. I mean, any thoughts about that?
It's funny you asked because I was just going to say, don't get me started on that.
We were there when it was happening.
Yeah, we were there.
What's the deterrent for crime, period, in our state especially? What it seems like is happening lately is you're making it harder for us, law enforcement, to investigate cases. We've got to jump through hoops now when a juvenile's in custody. Punishments are less. They're not charging people with enhancements. So before, when we'd have a gang crime or a gang murder, you enhance the penalty because they're a gang member and they're in possession of a firearm at the time. And they took that gang enhancement away. They're taking some of the gun enhancements away. What's the deterrent?
Yeah.
So what's the deterrent? People aren't afraid to go to death row in California because they're not going to die. They know
there is no death row.
Well,
No,
that
they're
and
gonna
now
die
it's a
like everybody
rehabilitation
else.
center.
Yeah, they're going to die a natural death like everybody else, hopefully. Most people, I should say. There's no deterrent. So it drives me crazy. I don't get it.
We don't get it either. And it's really interesting that it was very quiet about this whole thing when they shut it down, because we were there when it was happening. And Laura was going in every day talking to everyone because she wanted to get as much information as she could from them before they shut it down, because she was afraid once they go into general pop, anything can happen, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So we were there, and there was no media coverage. Now, we're TV producers, and I'm a former journalist. So we were trying to get media press coverage. Nope.
They wouldn't even let us in.
Wouldn't allow. I mean, before that, they would have let us in, like before that whole period. So it was very strange. And I was a news broadcaster in Europe, and my friends in England were saying, oh, there's this piece on San Quentin airing on the BBC every day. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I was just, because they knew I was just there. And I'm like, so there was one piece where he went in and talked about all the horrible conditions that the inmates are living in and how they're going to make it a rehabilitation center. I just didn't understand what that meant.
I spoke about this recently. When these people go into prison, they don't stop becoming criminals.
No.
They learn a different way how to commit crimes in prison. And then they're going to come out of prison a polished inmate and a polished criminal. And then they're going to go back to what they were doing. Yeah, you can rehabilitate whatever you want. I'm sure there's a lot of people they have rehabilitated, but I guarantee you there's a lot more people that got worse being in prison and then getting out on the streets. And there's absolutely no deterrent for killing people. A few months ago, I had an uncle that was killed. One of our cases here at Sheriff's Homicide, and it was investigated by one of our teams. I saw a video of my uncle being stabbed and killed just walking down the street in Lancaster.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's awful.
Thank you. So, now I see it from the perspective of a victim's family, but I've always kind of seen it that way. I always have, because, that's my concern, is taking care of the family. It's our job to take care of the family.
Yes.
Worst part about our job, the worst part, is when I knock on your door at 2 or 3 in the morning and I have to tell you that your son or your daughter or your loved one was killed. But then hopefully months, years, weeks, whatever it takes, I get to knock on your door again and say, hey, I just want you. It's not a celebration to me. I want to let you know that we found the person that killed your loved one. It's not for us here at Homicide. It's not a high five moment. Let's go out for a beer. We solved this case. It's our job. And what are we celebrating exactly?
But at some aspect, it's got to feel good that
it's rewarding.
It's rewarding, where you realize you got the bad guy, you found it, you found him. They're behind bars. You can go and tell, the family, listen, we got him. He's not going to hurt anybody else, and we're sorry what happened to you and your family. So it
felt good. It felt good flying out of state to go talk to Kathy's sister and to be able to look her in the eye and tell her. So that part felt good.
Yeah.
Well, we need more detectives like you.
Exactly.
Because that's really awesome to hear.
But it sounds like you're probably going to be retiring soon based upon being there for 30 years.
You know what? I've got my youngest in college. As soon as he graduates, I'm graduating from this department. So,
what would you do after that? You go off into the sunset, or can you turn off the investigator?
No, I'll still work. I've got some opportunities with some other agencies that want me to take care of some cold cases, and I'll teach, I'll lecture, and I can't. I think if I stop working, I'll die.
We feel the same way.
Especially being on the pace you've probably been on for the past 30 some years as a detective. We know it's like you guys
right? Non-stop.
Exactly.
So, but exactly. I love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm sure